Today, the theme is the how to create a culture of dialogue. And Sarah and I have been talking about how there's been a lot in the written about how to create a culture of coaching, and this is a parallel to that. How to make dialogue the norm in the organization. So yes, and it sounds like I don't have to convince anybody here that dialogue is important, but still, I think it's nice to sort of remind ourselves, like, what are the kind of things that what are the kind of reasons why dialogue is so incredibly important. I very much agree. I also hesitate calling anything a silver bullet, sort of a one size fits all solution. But usually, when I introduce dialogue to people, I do say, well, it is kind of the tool that we use for everything, be it decision makings or innovations or conflict resolution. And so, if we can get better at dialogue, it has an impact on practically all organizational processes, because we always use dialogue or conversations for those processes. So, if we I think some of the places where it becomes very clear that dialogue is very important are some of the typical effects of looking at some of the typical effects when it's missing. For example, I think roughly when an organization gets beyond 20 people, which usually happens very quickly, that's when people start putting up walls and finding it smart to sit in different rooms. And at that instance, all the problems that people in one department are experiencing is probably the fault of the people on the other side of the room, right? The moment you have physical structures that impede that natural tendency to conversation, you immediately see the results of that lack of dialogue. And often it becomes infighting between departments, turf wars, blaming other departments for problems, even in the absence of clear evidence. So that's one of the places. I think another place is unsuccessful hires. I've been talking to many managers about the unsuccessful hires, and it's always clear that the conversation that should have taken place before the hire wasn't taking place. The role wasn't clearly defined. The wishes of different people for what this new person should and shouldn't do wasn't clarified. There wasn't an agreement around this. And sometimes it's the conversation after the hire that's missing, where again, people don't get clear about what their role is, what they're measured on, what the success criteria actually are, and therefore it leads to problems, and sometimes people leaving the company relatively soon on their own accord, or because somebody fires them pretty quickly before the trial period is over. Finally, another example where I think it's very clear to see that dialogue is really important is around KPIs. So of course KPIs are very useful. It's very good to measure stuff and know if we are on the right path. But the problem is that if there isn't a solid dialogue around what to measure and why to measure it, many times people get too obsessed with the numbers, and sometimes people get more focused on producing the right numbers than on doing what actually needs to be done, so doing good work. And sometimes people will have very different interpretations of the numbers. One of the things that I teach at Copenhagen Business School is research methodology. And in research methodology, we often talk about how quantitative and qualitative research complement each other, because in quantitative research, you can gather a lot, you can measure a lot of things, but you might not understand what the numbers mean unless you go out and talk to some people, you interview some people, you do some more qualitative research methods. So these are some examples that illustrate why dialogue is so important. And as with many things, we especially become aware of the importance of dialogue by looking at the situations where it's absent. So yes, and so it's one thing to say that dialogue is really important and that it would be wonderful to create organizations where dialogue is just the norm. But of course, dialogue isn't the same as conversation. And so it can be quite difficult because it's not enough to say to people that they have to talk together. Because as you know, many times when people talk together, it isn't really a dialogue. It's more something like serial monologues. So I'm talking to somebody and they're saying their piece, and I'm half paying attention because the other half of my attention is occupied with preparing my own monologue that will come when they stop talking, and so on. So that's one thing. And then of course sometimes when we talk together, it's more debates. So this is the kind of conversation where we try to win over each other. And so I will listen to what the other person is saying, not to understand it, but to spot the flaws so that I can use that to make my own point stronger. Because I know I'm right, and basically we're just having this conversation because the other person is a bit daft, and I'm just waiting for them to understand me, but I'm not seeking to understand them. Although I do believe that some people who are more skilled in debates actually put in a lot of effort to understand the other. But again, the reason they won't do it is to win the argument. And then of course this brings us to dialogue, which is the kind of conversation that is the process of thinking together. So you might take a standpoint like you would do in a debate, but you're not too attached to it. You engage in the conversation with the willingness and I would almost say desire to have your viewpoint changed. Because if you engage in the conversation and your viewpoint doesn't change, it's kind of boring. Again, with research, right? If you do research and you have a hypothesis and you collect data and you analyze the data and your hypothesis is confirmed, that can be nice, but it's not nowhere near as exciting as if you take all the knowledge and you say, given everything we know, this should be true, and you collect the data and it isn't, right? That's interesting. That's where you learn something. So that attitude is what underpins dialogue, and it's really lovely, that attitude. And William Isaacs sums it up in a very nice way by saying that dialogue is a conversation with a center, not sides. So we are together exploring something. We might take different positions, but it's not discussion. It's not like we're trying to convince other people of our side. We contribute our viewpoints to the conversation in order to enhance the collective exploration. So, but I assume that I'm not saying anything anybody would really disagree with here, judging from the number of thumbs up reactions that I see. So then the question becomes, how do we create a culture of dialogue given its challenges? How do we do that? And Sarah and I have put our heads together and come up with 3 simple, pragmatic tools for doing so. And of course, I mean, we run the courses, and hope to see all of you on the next one in, I think it's October. And of course, you can learn a lot of very detailed and sophisticated tools to create dialogue and support dialogue and make it part of the cultural DNA. But you can get really far with some very simple pragmatic tools. So that's what we're going to focus on here. And the first tool that we're going to focus on is just what we did at the beginning of this meeting, check-ins. So simply using check-ins consciously to build the kind of containers that will support dialogue, to create the kind of relationships and the kind of attitudes that support dialogue. And when we do check-ins, then it's there's a good way of doing it is by having a few questions. So like, for example, in the check-in we did at the beginning here, it's like, well, what's your name? Always nice if people don't know each other. And what drew you to this webinar? Why did you choose to spend a perfectly good hour of your valuable time coming to this webinar? And of course, when people answer that question, we get a lot of interesting information. And as you saw already by hearing each other, connections start happening, right? It's like, wow, I'm working on this as well. Can we connect? So this is it. And and you can do it by using questions like we did. You can also do it by using sentence stems. So sometimes we will, in check-ins, we will say, complete the following sentence, right? So it would be maybe a little too formal to say, complete the sentence, I am at this webinar because I'm interested in ... But that would be an example of a sentence stem. You can use sentence stems that are specific to the topic of the meeting. For example, if you're working with the organizational purpose, one of the sentence stems that Sarah often will use, I know, is one of the things that make me proud to work here is. Right? And you can see how that will really collect a lot of information already in the check-in, so you will understand what are the kind of things that people really value and are proud of. Other than that, I think one of the purposes of check-ins, or one of the effects of check-ins, is that it brings all the voices into the room. This is incredibly important because, as you know, some people are very good at just jumping in the conversation, saying their piece, giving a voice to what they see, and other people might be a little more shy, a little more holding back for a whole host of reasons. And it's just good to set the tone from the beginning of roughly equal airtime and encourage everybody to dive in. And by going systematically through a check-in where everybody speaks a little bit, then everybody will already be engaged in the conversation even before it starts, you can say. So that's one of the purposes. And yes, and setting the pattern of full participation. It also helps people to land in the meeting. I think this is something that we have busy lives. We go from meeting to meeting, and especially nowadays when a lot of meetings are online, there is sometimes zero transition time between one meeting and another. Sometimes you will see people saying, I have to go now because I have another meeting coming up, right? And they click a button and they're straight into the next meeting. And I don't know about you, but for me, it takes a little while to sort of land in the meeting and get your head around, what was this thing about? What were we supposed to discuss? What were the things that I really needed to say here? Check-ins give that time to land, to collect yourself, to remember what the meeting is about. So this is another really important thing. It also creates a sense of psychological safety. So this is something that is incredibly important for dialogues, because when everybody speaks, everybody listens to you, and you hear something personal maybe also from other people. Like one of the questions that Sarah and I often use in check-ins is, what's the energy you come into the room with? And so somebody might say, well, I'm a little stressed out because this thing happened in my private life and something like that. It makes people more human. And when you have a sense that you're sitting in the group, in the room with a bunch of humans, you generally feel more safe. When you have that personal connection with other people, it brings a lot of psychological safety. And that's great, especially if later we have to discuss something that is high stakes, something that's valuable, something where strong emotions and strong opinions are in play. This sense of psychological safety is key. The last thing I will mention around check-ins is that it changes the discourse. When you meet people, you might have a tendency to be really polite and not really saying what's on your mind. You speak, but you're not being real in how you're speaking. Check-ins can have questions that encourage people to be more real, and that moves the discourse from something that's might be a little polite and not really mentioning or dancing around the issues to something where people give voice to their true opinions. So changing the dialogue to and having it drop to something that feels more real and where people feel comfortable saying actually what's on their mind and how they feel is something that the check-in can do. So this is one tool, very simple. Just start every meeting with a check-in, and it doesn't have to take long, but if you are good at designing the sentence stems or questions that guide the meeting or guide the check-in, it can be an incredibly valuable tool. Yeah, Sarah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, if I can just quickly add to what you said there, Klaus, and then let's come on to our second tool very shortly. I was thinking back to the point that Georgina made earlier about the power of words and how the choice of words for the check-in question can make a real difference. So just going back to that example you've already given, Klaus, what's the energy you're stepping in with? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your energy? Where 10 is kind of punching the air and 1 is you're completely drained. Where are you? For many people in the corporate world, that's an easier way in than the question, how are you feeling? Which will have some people running for the hills. But you want to hear, as you've been saying, Klaus, how people are on a human level. So choosing the right words, I think, makes a real difference. And then the other thing I'm just going to quickly add is I think there's a bit of a kind of risk profile of checking questions. Some feel easier and safer than others. If a group is just getting going, meeting for the first time, let's go for those. I recently worked with a group. They were meeting for the second time or the third time, maybe it was. And the check-in I used with them was around permission notes. You're going to give yourself a note here, a permission note. I give myself permission to in this session. And it was fascinating hearing people say things like, speak out more, say what's really on my mind, say if I don't know. And it felt a bit riskier, but it got us into a great space really quickly. So just another option there, a permission note for a check-in. Back to you, Klaus.
So I think this is a really good point, like workshopping the brief for the check-in and gathering experience and calibrating what kind of questions you should pose in the check-in then match where the group that's meeting where they are. Good. So so check-ins, that's the first tool. Then the second tool that we are going to present we call it group agreements, and this is just a list of rules of engagement for dialogue. So how do we like to participate in dialogue? What are some good ground rules for how to participate in dialogue? And of course, knowing about the theory behind dialogue will greatly help you craft good ground rules. But I'm just going to go through some of the ground rules that Sarah and I often use. So one of the ground rules that we often use, and this may or may not be useful in all situations. For us, it's very useful, and that is keep confidentiality. We often say, but that's also because we run workshops. So we often say, you are welcome to share the insights and stories, your own insights and your own stories that you encountered or worked with in the workshop, but not the stories of others. And of course, sometimes in meetings, it can be very useful to have confidentiality. Maybe you want to talk about a topic that where people are worried about speaking out because they're worried about the repercussion if certain other people find out what they think. And so stating that this is a confidential conversation, nothing's going to leave this room, can be really, really useful in maybe making people a little more confident or comfortable with speaking their mind. And in particular, speaking the things that you really want them to say, right? The things that are really important. The other thing, another ground rule is be present and listen fully. Phones off, right? It's like, don't answer your mails while we're having the meeting. Be here. And sometimes during the check-in, Sarah and I will ask people to a question like, what do you need to say in order to be able to be fully present? So sometimes people have something on their mind, there's something that bothers them, and just saying like, look, I just came out of another meeting and there's this issue and it really bothers me. And just saying it, many times that enables people to kind of mentally park the issue and then be fully present for the meeting. So, and it can be many other things. Maybe there's other things, maybe they are really concerned about, like Sarah was talking about before, you want the meeting to, you hope that the meeting will actually result in some real decisions being made, but you're worried that it won't. And just giving voice to that, so I'm concerned whether we're gonna get something out of this meeting or not. That can be something that people need to voice, and then that enables them to be fully present. Another one that I think is a fantastic ground rule is welcome uncomfortable moments. When we use this, we often say we're not aiming for there to be uncomfortable moments. It's not that we are trying to create uncomfortable moments, but if they do arise, it's better to engage with them than to try and smooth over them, because that's often where the learning is. Be on time is another one that's very useful, because dialogue is because dialogue is a journey. And it's very good to be there from the start. This is not specifically directed at you, but yeah. But in general, that's we're talking about the ground rules for dialogue. And this is one of the good ground rules for dialogue. Another one is free to pass, which is also very good, because sometimes there might be questions or discussions, or somebody asks you a direct question, and it's good to have that ground rule to say, well, no, I'm not ready to talk about this right now. I prefer to pass for whatever reason. That also, it's a ground rule that creates a lot of the psychological safety that's so necessary for dialogue to be successful. Another one is nobody gets it wrong, and there are no stupid questions. This is really important. I used to work a lot with musicians, and I used to work a lot with within the community of musicians that co-write. And they have an interesting rule. They say when a bunch of musicians get together and co-write a song, everybody in the room get an equal share of the royalties. Even if none of your suggestions make it into the song, right? None of your chords make it into the chord progression. None of your words make it into the lyrics. You know, the instrument you're playing is never recorded. Why? Because the contributions, even if they're not used in the final product, triggered other people's ideas. And so a really dumb question might be a very good contribution to a dialogue because it allows other people to formulate exactly why it's a dumb question. And through that process, you learn more. So this is why there are no dumb questions. There are no nobody gets it wrong. When you propose something and then later you learn it's wrong, then it was key that you proposed it, because that allowed the group to figure out that no, this is not where we're going. And the last thing that we often put on the list is anything else. Sometimes people in the group might say, I would like this to be part of our agreement on how we engage in dialogue. So this was another simple question of how to create a culture of dialogue, having a list of group agreements that you can again refer back to. You can just put them on a slide, show them for 5 seconds in the beginning of a meeting. If you've already gone through them and people know them, 5 seconds reminder is all that people really need in order to say, oh yes, this is true, this is how we are, this is the way that we talk together here, and this supports real dialogue. So check-ins and rules of engagement, ground rules, are two simple and practical tools that we can use to create a culture of dialogue. So I'll hand it back to you, Sarah, for the third tool.
Thank you very much, Klaus. So the two tools that Klaus has covered get you off to a strong start. They help to build what is sometimes called a container for having those critical conversations, that atmosphere, that container where you've got not just psychological safety in the room, but you've got people energized and engaged, and there's a sense of possibility. So then the question is, what do you do once you've hopefully got off to a strong start? And I'm going to speak about a couple of things here. And for the second one, and Klaus, I'm slightly doing some improv here, because I'm realizing it really connects with a call I had with a client earlier. So could you enable me to screen share, Klaus? And I'm going to share one of the tools as a document on screen, if this is possible. And also very happy to get this document to you. Klaus is in communication with you. So hopefully, Klaus, you're going to be able to let me do a screen share. But let me just speak to the other one. Thank you, Klaus. Well, that's getting sorted. So one of the things that Klaus and I use, and then I use it also working with teams or in team coaching work, is what's sometimes called a continuum line. So at this point, you're inviting people to stand up, get out of their seats, and you might, for example, in the context of a team coaching session, I might share a definition of a high-performing team, and that's like 10 out of 10 on the continuum line, the team being in that place. And then at the other end of the line, low performing team. And then I will say something around, I'm going to invite you to stand on the line to reflect your perception of where the team currently is. And go for where feels true for you. You know, you're going to see other people moving about, you might move about a little bit. And then typically what you get is a spread on the continuum line. And it's very valuable to hear from all the different people, wherever they are on the line. I often start low and hear those perceptions and then gradually move up. And I'm learning as a dialogue practitioner, as a dialogue guide, that sometimes the richest conversations happen not actually when you're in your circle of chairs or around the boardroom table. They can actually happen when people are up on their feet. I don't know if that makes people more present. I don't know if it brings some dynamism into the room. But continuum lines like the one I've just described, or you could have about levels of trust in the team, I've used that, you know, can be very helpful for getting a good, authentic dialogue going. So that was the first thing I wanted to cover. The second thing, if I can do my screen share, so if you could please bear with me a moment. Let me see if I can share this tool. Here we go. And as I say, very happy to get a copy of this to you. So this is a tool called the Critical Conversations Grid. And I should acknowledge where it comes from. It's the work of Andrew White and myself. Andrew White is at Said Business School. We've done a lot of work together, and we've used this grid in team coaching sessions. And so you've got all the instructions here. I'll just talk you through it briefly. People fill this in individually to begin with. So the grid's coming up in just a moment. They think about the critical conversations that would add value to the team or to the board. Maybe it's the ones that they're avoiding or messing up in some way. And I'm going to ask each person to put 3 or more topics on the grid. And I also encourage people to reflect on what gets in the way of you having those conversations. Why are you avoiding them? And what it might take for you and your team to actually lean in and have those conversations. And the grid is picking up on 2 dimensions: the impact that having the conversation could have on performance, and secondly, how difficult you perceive it is to have that conversation. And then that gives you a grid where you've got some big win conversations potentially. Those conversations are both impactful and maybe feel quite difficult for people to have. You've got quick wins, so they're impactful but less difficult. And you can see on the notes here, I'm not going to go through that, there are examples for each of these. Pains in the neck, those tricky, difficult conversations that have less impact, but they are still kind of necessary in some way. And then finally, you've got these just do it's or JFDIs, as they're sometimes called, but I'm going to call them JDIs. They're less impactful and less difficult. And maybe if you just scheduled 15 minutes in your calendar, you could have those just do it's. So the grid looks like this, with the big wins, the quick wins, the just do it's, and the pains in the neck. So I'll just stop the share there and come back, and then I can see you all on screen. So as I say, very happy to get a copy of that 2-page document to you. And in my experience, working through that, that movement from some individual thinking time and reflection time, give people time to gather their thoughts. You've maybe done your check-in, you've set your ground rules, and then you might ask people to get into a trio or into a small group of 4 and to share their grids in the smaller group. And of course that takes a bit of time. And then typically what I do as a final stage is I go into the room with some masking tape. I put a big cross on the floor. I've got sheets of card, and we collectively, whether that's as a group of 12 people or 18 people, we start to place topics on the grid. And then it depends what happens then. What we might then do is go to those big wins and just select 1 or 2 of the topics where you're converging on a big win, and actually spend some time leaning into those specific conversations. And that does sometimes provoke some uncomfortable moments, but it can really get you into a rich dialogue in a calibrated way. So that's the critical conversations grid as a tool.
And maybe just to round off, if you want the fuller answer, Then we have a workshop that takes place on the 16th and the 17th of October. And yeah, of course, you are all very welcome. You'll receive a mail tomorrow with some of the recording, not of the full webinar, but of Sarah's and my presentation, so you can re-listen to that. None of you will be on the webinar or on the recording. And you will also get the information about how to sign up for the course, and when it's going to take place, and all these kind of things. And yeah, we hope that you will join the course, and also by joining the course become part of the larger community of people who have gone through the course, because it's such wanting to create a culture of dialogue. It's such an asset to be connected with other people in other organizations that are on the same mission. And then you can, I'm happy to see that some of you have already connected, because it's really supportive to say, well, like you were saying, right, what do I do with this management team that, and the power differences, and they have this animosity, and maybe somebody else say, well, actually, I tried out something and it worked really well, and you can learn from each other. So yes, that was it for today.
Yeah, super. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your evening, your afternoon. Thank you. All the best.